They barely noticed him when he arrived before sunrise, pushing a yellow mop bucket down the marble hallway like a ghost gliding between offices of power. His name was Elijah Moore, but no one ever used it. To most, he was just the janitor. Quiet, head down, always early, always invisible. Elijah worked on the 42nd floor of Blackwell and Pierce, a towering corporate empire where glass walls reflected status and silence meant obedience. The executives arrived later, dressed in confidence and entitlement, stepping over the freshly cleaned floors without a glance. Some nodded out of habit. Others pretended he didn't exist. At the top of that food chain stood Richard Blackwell, senior partner, legacy hire, and a man who believed power was proof of superiority. Richard didn't just ignore Elijah. He seemed irritated by his presence, as if the sight of a black man quietly doing his job offended the order of things. Richard made a point of it. He'd snap his fingers when Elijah passed. He'd complain about that smell, even when the hallway sparkled. Once, during a staff meeting held early, Richard stopped mid-sentence and said loudly, "Can we get maintenance to be less distracting?" His eyes cut straight to Elijah. The room laughed nervously. Elijah kept his eyes down. What no one knew, what no one bothered to ask, was why a man with a calm, deliberate way of moving chose to scrub floors at dawn, or why he listened more than he spoke, or why, when he passed conference rooms, he lingered just long enough to hear key phrases, names, and numbers. They assumed quiet meant weak. That assumption would cost them everything. The day it happened, the office buzzed with anticipation. A major acquisition was on the line, and Richard Blackwell was already on edge. When stress hit him, his cruelty sharpened. Elijah was polishing the glass outside the executive boardroom when Richard stormed out, phone pressed to his ear. He stopped short when he saw Elijah. "Do you mind?" Richard snapped. "Some of us are trying to run a company." Elijah stepped back immediately. "Sorry, sir." Richard ended the call and looked him up and down. "What's your name?" "Elijah." "Well, Elijah," Richard said loudly enough for nearby assistants to hear, "this isn't a shelter. If you can't stay out of the way, maybe you don't belong here." A few people snickered. Something in Elijah's eyes flickered, just for a moment, but he said nothing. Later that afternoon, HR received a complaint. Richard claimed the janitor was lingering suspiciously near confidential meetings. By the end of the day, Elijah was called into a small room and handed termination papers. No investigation, no questions. Richard watched from his office as Elijah walked out carrying a cardboard box with his lunch pail inside. He smiled, satisfied. Order restored. What Richard didn't know was that HR had already scheduled a meeting for the next morning. One that would expose a truth buried beneath mop water and silence. At 9 a.m. sharp, the boardroom filled with senior leadership and HR executives. Richard sat at the head of the table, confident, already planning his next power move. The HR director, Ms. Alvarez, cleared her throat. "Before we begin," she said, "we need to address yesterday's termination." Richard waved a dismissive hand. "Already handled." Ms. Alvarez clicked a remote. A photo appeared on the screen, Elijah, but not in janitor's clothes. He stood in a tailored suit, standing beside senators, shaking hands with CEOs. The room went silent. Elijah Moore, Ms. Alvarez continued, is not a janitor by trade. He is the founder and majority stakeholder of Moore Strategic Holdings, the private equity firm currently negotiating to acquire 40% of this company. Richard's smile collapsed. "Elijah took the janitorial position," she said, "as part of a due diligence assessment. Cultural integrity, leadership ethics, workplace equity." She paused. "You failed." The door opened. Elijah walked in. Elijah didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. He simply spoke the truth. "I wanted to know who you were when no one was watching," he said, eyes locked on Richard. "And you showed me." The board voted within minutes. The acquisition was withdrawn. Richard was placed on immediate administrative leave, pending investigation for discriminatory conduct. By noon, security escorted him out. The same hallway, the same eyes watching. This time, no one laughed. Weeks later, Blackwell and Pierce announced sweeping reforms. New leadership, mandatory equity training, transparent accountability. Elijah returned, not with a mop, but with a mandate. He addressed the staff simply. "Never confuse silence with weakness," he said, "and never underestimate the people you think are beneath you, because sometimes the floor you walk on is held up by someone who owns the building." And that's how Elijah Moore, the quiet janitor everyone overlooked, completely turned the tables on Richard Blackwell and exposed the truth. From being underestimated and humiliated to reclaiming authority and showing that justice always finds its way, his story is a powerful reminder. Never judge someone by the role they appear to play. If you felt the tension, the suspense, and the satisfaction of seeing justice served, drop a comment below and tell us what part shocked you the most. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story where the underestimated rise, the truth comes out, and justice is finally served.